Okay, there we go. There's a mute button on top. Maybe that gets hit sometime.
Okay. All right, good now. Calvin, a lot of our education programs here. Anyway, so being May the 4th be with you, I thought it would be fun to have a look at the Star Wars universe and compare that to our universe. And have a look at how incredibly, and I don't know how this happened, but for some reason in the Star Wars universe, the laws of physics are different than they are here. And this is remarkable. I mean, one of the tenets, one of the foundations of science is that the laws of physics are the same everywhere. That's so that we can know when we look out into space that we see a star being born. Oh, that's how stars are born. That's how galaxies come together. That's how planets are formed. But in this galaxy, for some reason, things are different. So now we don't know where that galaxy is or when it was. But it must have been a very long time when the laws of physics were slightly different. So let me just go through some of the things that are different in this universe than in ours. First of all, explosions make noise. You cannot hear explosions in space here because there's no air to conduct the sound. But in their galaxy, you can. So there must be some kind of ether or something between the stars that's transmitting the sound. I don't know what it is, but sound travels in space. You can also hear the sound of engines. So you hear the sounds of all of the the X-wing fighters and all these things. You can hear their sounds. And these fighters fly like jet fighters. They swoop and they make loops and they fly like this. Whereas here in space, if you want to get around, you got to follow the laws of orbital mechanics and you use vectors. You fire thrusters. You go Not like this, but they can. That's amazing. So they've got the ability to fly through space. They don't have to worry about the laws of physics. And that's the same is true for the TIE fighters and the Imperial destroyers. So they're also building things very, very large. These destroyers in the later ones are the size of Manhattan. The largest thing that we put up into space, the International Space Station, is just a bit bigger than a football field. So we've got a long way to go before we get up to the scale of the Imperial battle cruisers. So they're capable of building incredible sources. The other thing I noticed about all of their vehicles, whether they're the large or the small, they never need refueling. You notice that you never see them putting gas in them or whatever. I don't know. What do they run on? And they have so much energy in such a small space to have these weapons plus all the maneuverability. And the other thing that they have conquered is local gravity. Local gravity. Inside the ships, everyone walks around like we do here. But as soon as you step through a hatch, you're weightless outside. No weight outside, lots of gravity inside. We have not figured out how to do that yet. We have Star Trek does the same thing. Actually, most movies do, because it's much easier for the directors of Hollywood movies rather than suspending people on wires, which they have done for some movies, but it's really, really difficult to do. The only way we can create artificial gravity in our universe is to spin things around. So you either spin your spaceship so that you stick to the inside walls, or you move in a circle. And I just wrote a blog about this that just came out yesterday. There's a group in Italy that tried to prove that you can run on the walls on the moon. This is a stunt. You might have seen one of these in carnivals or exhibitions where it's called the Wall of Death. So they've got this big wooden circle and they ride motorcycles around on the inside wall. And sometimes they even put cars up there and they'll stick. As long as they move faster than 50 kilometers an hour, the inertia of motion, which wants them to go in a straight line, is balanced by the centripetal force of the curve that's pulling them towards the inside. And when the two are balanced, you'll stick to the wall. So what they did, they thought, well, you can't do this on Earth if you try to run because the Earth's gravity will pull you down. You can't run at 50 kilometers an hour. However, on the moon, where the gravity is only 1/6, you take much larger steps. And you can actually reach about 20 kilometers an hour, which is all you need. So they suspended somebody in the middle and gave them lunar gravity, and they found that they could actually run around the inside of this wall. And even though they're in moon gravity, every time their foot hits the wall, they're feeling the force of 1g that they would feel here on Earth. So that'll keep their bones strong, which is really important for astronauts. They have to keep their bones strong. So when we go to the moon, when we build colonies, we won't have to build a wall of death like this. Instead, make your living room round. Just put round walls on it. So you need to loosen up a bit, just run around the walls. You'll be able to do that. So that's what's going to happen in the future. We'll have round colonies on the moon. But that's the only way we can create artificial gravity here. But in the Star Wars universe, they can do it within a ship. Even if it's a small ship. It's amazing. I don't know how they do that. They can also travel faster than light. Boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could do that? Holy smokes. Travel faster than light. They have somehow proven that Einstein is wrong. That light, which is represented by a c, which means constant. Einstein said the speed of light is always constant. They managed to get around that. Not only that, can their spaceships move faster than the speed? They can concentrate light. They can concentrate light and turn it into a weapon. Now, light for us doesn't have a lot of force. It's coming out of these lights right here, but I guess they're not strong enough. But they managed to take light and put so much energy in it that it could blow up a planet. That's astounding. To concentrate so much energy in light. And when they fire these things, you can actually see the, woo, look at it. You can actually see the beam. You can see the beam coming out. So it's traveling slower than the speed of light when it's a weapon, because you can see it going woo, woo, woo. Yeah, that's quite amazing. And they can even put light beams together. They can cause them to concentrate and then form one solid beam without a mirror. And that's all pretty astounding. And then the one that really gets me is what several people brought tonight are these lightsabers. Here's a device that creates a light beam that goes about 2 meters and stops. It stops. How does it do that? Light always goes to infinity where we are, but there it stops. And it's so dense that it's harder than steel. You can hit somebody with it. And all that energy is coming out of a little handle that never needs recharging. Boy, have they got battery technology worked out. We need that. We need better battery technology like they have. So they've done all these remarkable things that just don't fit in our universe, the laws of physics. And the other thing they can do that would be really handy for us is they can communicate instantly over any distance. Doesn't matter how far it is, they can communicate instantly, even through hyperspace. We cannot do that. It takes us a long time. Even if you want to talk to Mars, the rovers that we have on Mars, it's a 20-minute trip one way for a signal to get there, and another 20 minutes for the signal to come back. That's why they cannot drive the rovers on Mars like a remote-controlled car. Because if they're driving it along and they're looking at the monitor and it's coming to a big cliff, they say, stop! It'll be 20 minutes before it hears that. So that's why they have to be smart. That's why we give them brains. And we say, okay, look around, go over there and look at that rock. And then it does that. So it's capable of going and looking at a rock, then it says, what do you want me to do next? Then we tell it. So that's because of the time difference. But in the Star Wars universe, no problem. You can communicate any distance instantly. Okay, so, another thing. All the aliens understand English. Even if they don't speak it, they understand it. That's amazing. English is a universal language, truly. It's a universal language. Unbelievable. And most of the aliens, I mean, there are a few exceptions like Jabba the Hutt, but most of the aliens, they look like us. You know, all of the characters are still just one head, 2 arms, 2 legs. Isn't that amazing that evolution completely duplicated in another galaxy far, far away? They look like us. And Yoda, who has the biggest brain in the universe, how come he couldn't put a sentence together grammatically correct? Oh, anxious you are. Oh. You're supposed to, yeah, anyway. So all of these remarkable coincidences are happening now. Okay, so let's look at ourselves. How do we compare? How do we compare to the Star Wars universe? Well, if we're going to find aliens, there's a mission that's going to leave later this year called the Europa Clipper. And it's going to go to a moon of Jupiter called Europa. And if we're going to find alien life, this is one of the closest places. People are thinking maybe there's life on Mars, but it's pretty sterile there. Maybe there's life in Mars. But this moon, that's just a bit smaller than our moon, is totally covered in ice. And the ice, which is water ice, is cracked. And that means it's been moving around. So they've calculated that there's an ocean underneath that ice, get this, that has more water than we do. It's got more water than all the water on the Earth in a moon of Jupiter. So, and it's salt water. So if you're going to find life, there's water out there. I think they should send a couple of Canadians to go ice fishing, you know, dig a hole, drop a line, see what we catch. But this thing's going to go there and it's going to orbit and it's going to try to figure out how thick the ice is and how much of it is ice and how much of it is liquid. And there's another moon that's going around Saturn called Enceladus that also has an ocean under its icy surface, and it's cracked. And there is water leaking out into space, forming these ice geysers that are shooting out hundreds and hundreds of kilometers into space, and we flew through those. We had a spacecraft called Cassini that was in orbit around Saturn, and they aimed it right through those plumes, and they analyzed the ice. And it turned out that not only is it water ice, but it contains some organic chemicals, some phosphates, and some things that are very, very similar to what we have at the bottom of our oceans, right off the coast of British Columbia here. Hot water vents, hydrothermal vents. These are places in the deep, deep ocean where sun never shines, it's totally dark, very cold, but this hot water comes out of the bottom of the ocean. And there's all this life that clings to that hot water, that heat, and lives around it. It's an entire self-sufficient ecosystem. It doesn't need the sun. It uses the chemistry that comes out of these black smokers. And there's worms, and there's crabs, and there's these giant tube worms, and a whole ecosystem there. Some people think this is how life started on Earth, the original form of life on Earth. So is this happening in these ice moons of Jupiter and Saturn? This is probably what the first aliens we find are going to look like. They're not going to be little green men with heads and bodies and arms. They're going to probably look like that. So that's the closest we're probably going to find, first where we're going to find life here in our solar system. When I was a kid, what? Come on, you've all got pictures like this somewhere. When I was 6 years old, which I think is when this picture was taken, I was living in Orillia, Ontario, just north of Toronto. My sister dated Gordon Lightfoot. He was from the same town. So I was living in Orillia, and I remember, as a 6-year-old kid, the headline, the whole front page of our Orillia Packet and Times. It looked like this. This is from the New York Times, so it has a thing about Jimmy Hoffa. But this part over here, this graphic, which I'm sorry isn't very high resolution, but I remember it. It's a drawing of the Earth with a circle around it, saying that the Russians had put up the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, in 1957. I remember that. I was alive. That means, two things. One, I'm really old. But two, the entire human space program has happened in my lifetime. Everything we've done in space has happened within my lifetime. So I've seen it all. And I followed it all because I was inspired by this. Space, rockets, whoa, that's fabulous. This is really great. And I followed it very closely. The Russians put up, after they put up the first satellite, they put up the first dog, Laika the dog. She was chosen, she was a mongrel that they found in the street actually, but she was very calm and very nice, had a very nice personality, so she didn't mind being strapped into this thing. Unfortunately, the capsule that they put her in didn't have landing technology. So it was a one-way trip for poor Laika. She got incinerated on the way back. But she was the first animal in space. And there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear here in North America that if the Russians could put up something this big, they could put up a nuclear weapon that goes around the Earth every hour and a half, including over North America. So this was kind of scary that they could do this. The Americans could not. They didn't have rockets big enough to do that. And then they put up the first human, Yuri Gagarin, who also, when he went up, they did not have landing technology. So he had to jump out. When the parachute opened, and he was down under the parachute, he had to blow the hatch and come out and then go under a parachute himself. And apparently he landed on a farm. And there were these farm workers, and this guy in an orange suit comes down out of the sky. He said, "Where'd you come from?" He said, "I came from a ship." "There's no water around here. What are you talking about?" And he said, "Take me to a phone." But so the first human, all of this happened before the Americans got off the ground, but they finally did. They had their the first Mercury 7, and I knew all their names and followed them all along. You know, Scott Carpenter, Gordon Cooper, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Wally Schirra, Alan Shepard, and Deke Slayton. Yes, I can still remember. Anyway, I followed these. These were the first Mercury 7, and the first one to go up was Alan Shepard in this little tiny rocket. So this is our X-wing fighter. One person, and that's it. And all it did was go up about, 150 kilometers up and straight back down again. 15-minute flight. But that was the first time in space for the Americans. And then after that, they stuck with these capsules. They had the Gemini, and then on to the moon. We did have a winged spacecraft for a while, the shuttle, which built the International Space Station, but it couldn't go very far. It couldn't go very far. These big solid rocket boosters here, most powerful rockets we've ever built, they ran for 2 minutes. Then they were out of fuel, so they had to get rid of them. And the main engines on that big orange fuel tank ran for 8.5 minutes. That's it. 8.5 minutes, then you're out of gas. So it could get into Earth orbit, but it couldn't go any further than that. It was a delivery truck. But most sophisticated delivery truck we ever made. We stopped flying this because it was costing about $1.5 billion every time it took off. So it was a rather expensive toy. So they said, okay, well, maybe we can do it a little cheaper. So now they're building this thing, which costs $4 billion every time it takes off. And it's based on shuttle technology. It's got the same stuff. And it only flies every few years, but it's done one trip. And we'll have a Canadian on the next one, Jeremy Hansen. So he'll go up on that. We have other capsules, the private ones, the Dragon and all of this. But we're back to capsules. We're back to just little tiny capsules. That's how we get around. This is after 60 years of flying in space. We're still putting ourselves in little capsules that fall in the ocean. We haven't really progressed very much and haven't gone very far. Now, Elon Musk is trying to change that with Starship. It's flown, it's flown twice. Well, it got off the ground twice. First time it blew up, well, you could still see it. Second time it actually made it to space, but it still blew up and didn't make it all the way around the Earth. So all he has to do is prove that it flies. There's another flight supposedly coming up in another month or so, so they'll see if they really make it. But this is big. It's quite big. And NASA has already contracted SpaceX to make it the craft that'll bring people back to the moon. But he has to prove it flies first. And they have to go through a lot to make sure that they can do this safely. And Elon Musk believes that that same spaceship will take people to Mars. And he believes that each spaceship could carry 100 people at a time, and that he could build a Mars colony and have 1 million people on Mars within the next, 50 or 100 years. Would you like to be in a tin can with 100 people for 7 months, which is how long it takes just to get to Mars? And then once you're on Mars, you can't come home because you have to wait for the Earth to come back. You go to Mars when the Earth and Mars are on the same side of the sun and the distance is short. But in the time it takes you to get to Mars, the Earth gets ahead. And so when you get there, it's down here somewhere. So you got to wait till the Earth comes back before you can go home. And then it's another 6 months home again. So it takes 2 years just to go to Mars and come back. And if you have an argument with somebody, you can't stomp out the door. So I think the psychological problems of going to Mars are going to be as bad as the technical ones. But anyway, that's going to be interesting to see what happens. That's the dream. Anyway, so that's our starship. How far have people gone? Well, I remember when Alexei Leonov made the first spacewalk. I came very close to meeting him. I really wanted to meet him, but he passed away just a couple of years ago. He almost died doing it. He went outside, floated around. He said, wow, this is great. I can see everything. And then he found that his fingers and his feet were coming out of the gloves and the boots because the suit was inflating. He was in a vacuum. And the air inside that was keeping him alive had inflated the suit. So when he tried to get back in, he didn't fit through the hatch. He got stuck. And he was trying to get in. He was head first instead of trying to get through, and he couldn't get in. You cannot come back to Earth stuck on the outside of a spaceship. You got to be inside. He couldn't. So the only way he could get in was to let air out of his suit. So he had to deflate it, and he almost suffocated. He had to let the pressure down so that he could squeeze inside and get in. He did, but they didn't do spacewalks for a long time after that because the suit inflated. Right after that, I watched Ed White take the first American spacewalk. He didn't have any trouble getting in and out. Much bigger door, for one thing. And then we went on to, of course, to the moon. And I had the extreme pleasure of meeting Buzz Aldrin. It was much later. It was while I was still living in Toronto about 15 years ago. And I helped to organize a conference on going back to the moon. And Buzz was the guest of honor. And they had a dinner. And at dinner, they sat me beside him. So here I am sitting beside Buzz Aldrin. Ooh, yeah, that's pretty cool. So I just threw this out, just for the heck of it. I said, hey, Buzz, I've got a sailboat in Toronto Harbor here. Would you like to go sailing tomorrow? Off the record? He went, sure. So I took Buzz Aldrin sailing. Here. I was having a bad hair day, but boy, I was excited. That was great. So yeah, he said, you know, the moon is a very interesting place, but it's not a very nice place. And he's right. The moon will kill you. The moon will kill you. And he was one of very few people who saw this, who saw the Earth from the moon. And you can see the sky is black because there's no atmosphere. If you go for a walk, would you like to see my imitation of somebody walking on the moon and they forget to put their spacesuit on? Suppose you're in a colony like this, we're indoors. I want to go for a walk. You just open the door and go out. Here's what would happen. So open the door, you go, that's one small step. You breathe out, but you don't breathe in because there's nothing out there. You go, and because there's no longer any pressure around your body, all your bodily fluids start to boil. And they burst out of your eyeballs and your ears and your nose and your mouth, comes out and forms pink snow in front of your face. And you fall slowly in the lunar gravity, gasping for a breath that will never come. And as you lie there in your own pink snow, you're getting cooked by cosmic and solar radiation. In 1 minute, you're dead. That's a walk on the moon. And if you do realize your mistake and manage to get back in, you're going to be blind, deaf, and really ugly. Because all your capillaries will burst out. It's awful. So the moon will kill you. The moon will kill you. And we have found that so will all the other planets we know about. They'll all kill you. So will Mars. No oxygen on Mars. Carbon dioxide. And there's very little of it. So again, you have to wear a spacesuit all the time on Mars. You can go there, but it's going to be hard. And people will, but it's going to be hard. So that was what we saw. Now, Jeremy Hansen, our Canadian, is going to be on the next moon mission, and he's going to see it even further away. They're going to go past the moon, several thousand kilometers past the moon, so he will see, this is an actual photograph from an unmanned flight on that capsule, looking back at the Earth and the moon. And so he's going to see that. Humans have never seen both in the same frame, so that'll be quite amazing. But the Earth is small. The Earth is small. From the moon, it's smaller than your little finger. You can cover the Earth with your little finger. And that's pretty profound. You know, the universe is big and black and deadly, and then we have this little tiny island that we live on. After we went to the moon, we started building space stations, and our Canadian Chris Hadfield went up on the Russian space station. The Russians were the first to do it after they lost the race to the moon. And they did have a moon program. They had a giant rocket, and Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, and Leonov, the first spacewalker, were supposed to be the ones to go there and do it. But their big rocket kept blowing up every time it flew, so they never made it. So they got into building space stations. And Chris got to go up on one of their largest, called Mir, in 1995, and I followed him to Russia there, did a couple of documentaries on him, and then he went on later to become the commander of the now International Space Station, the only Canadian to do that, and he did his tribute to David Bowie with, Ground Control to Major Tom, and all of it. Became famous for that. Okay, Chris actually does play, and he had an astronaut band called Max Q, which is that point when they go through maximum aerodynamic. And I was down visiting him in Houston at one time, and he invited me to join the band. So I played with his band for a little time. He said, "Wear a colorful shirt." So I wore a Hawaiian shirt, and he and I were the only two that wore Hawaiian shirts in the band. I didn't add much, but it was fun. We had fun playing, and Chris and I are still good friends. So that's how far humans have gone. We've been to the moon, and we've been in orbit. We haven't gone any further. What about interstellar travel? Well, we've had 5 spacecraft that are going interstellar. 2 of them called Pioneer 10 and 11, which went to Jupiter and Saturn. 2 of them called Voyager, which is what this launch is, and 1 of them called New Horizons that went to Pluto. When I heard about Voyager, which was launched in 1977, I wanted to be there because I heard that there were 2 spacecraft. They were both going to go to Jupiter and Saturn, and then Voyager 2 was going to continue on to Uranus and Neptune. They were going to do a grand tour of the outer solar system. And this had never been done before, and it was purely because all 4 of the big planets were on the same side of the sun. So they could do this big quadruple bank shot going out there. It would take them 12 years to do it. So I wanted to see this happen. So when Voyager was launched, Voyager 2 was launched first in August '77. I got on my motorcycle at the time and rode down to Cape Canaveral. And I was there with a group of people who did the golden record that's on the side. Carl Sagan, and this fellow here, John Lomberg, who is an artist, a space artist, who did the cover design, the drawing on the outside, and some of the illustrations on the inside. John and I were sharing a house in Toronto at the time. That's how I knew about it. So he inspired me. He said, "You got to come down." And it was really quite amazing because as we were watching Voyager sitting out there on the launch pad, it was on a military missile. And they're fairly thin. And we're looking at this little silver stick. You're 3 miles away from it, just this little stick. And John said, "Boy, sure doesn't look like a starship, does it?" But it was. The gravity of all those planets was going to throw the spacecraft right out of our solar system altogether. And Carl Sagan was up at the front. He wasn't sitting in the bleachers. He wanted to be as close as he was. He was up on the grass. The spaceship took off. Now, I've seen space shuttles take off. The ones that have people in them, they're very ponderous and very slow as they rise up, mostly because they're heavy, but also the people inside can't take any more than about 3 Gs, 3 times the weight of gravity. So they're fairly slow as they go up. But the unmanned ones, it's like, and my comment was, "Holy shit," like that. Anyway, look at that thing go. It was only in sight for about 50 seconds, and then it disappeared behind the clouds, and it was gone. It was gone. But it was just clawing its way out of the Earth's gravity. Just feel this thing's out of here. And by 6 o'clock that night, it was beyond the orbit of the moon. It took the Apollo astronauts 3 days to get there. Voyager did it in one night. And after it was gone and the sound went down, Sagan turned around and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, "We just sent a spaceship to the stars." And Voyager's still out there. It's still out there. And I made it my mission after the launch to go to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory here in Pasadena, California, where they control the spacecraft and where the pictures come in. So I was there in 1979 when we went to Jupiter. I was there in 1981 when we went to Saturn. 1986 when we went to Uranus, and 1989 when we went to we went to Neptune. This is John and I. There's the golden record at JPL. They have a model of Voyager there. I think this is at the in '86 at the Uranus counter. I got my hair cut. Oh, by the way, can you see me in that other picture? Yeah, this is me. Come on, you've all got pictures like that somewhere. Right? Yeah. So now remember that, okay? So that's what. So there it was, and Voyager's still out there. They've done their mission, but they're still working. And Voyager 1 is now the furthest object that we've ever sent, and it is 22.5 hours from here. That's how long it takes to get a signal to Voyager, 22.5 hours, and 22.5 hours for its signal to come back to us. So 45 hours to talk to it. It's almost one light day. It's almost one light day away. The closest star is 4.5 light years from here. And look what happened to me during this time. So it's taken a good chunk of my lifetime to get one light day away from here. So even our fastest spaceship is so slow. We need that hyperspace drive. We really do, if we want to go anywhere. Our spaceships are slow. Our interstellar ships are slow. Voyager didn't go to Pluto because Pluto wasn't in line, but in 2015, they sent another one called New Horizons. And I wanted to go see that, and it wasn't being controlled in Pasadena. Now that I live on the West Coast, it would have been easy to go to Pasadena. New Horizons was controlled in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins on the other coast. And I was walking through I still drive motorcycles, and I was walking through the local motorcycle shop, and I saw this one, and I said, I've got to get this, because it was a Vulcan Voyager. So I bought it, and I drove Voyager to Pluto. So Voyager got to Pluto. I got it there, and it was really quite amazing in 2015 to see Pluto. I had never ever seen it before. It had all kinds of surprises. Again, an ice moon, and its moons. It was just fabulous. So I feel like I have been across the solar system. I've witnessed the exploration, the primary exploration, where we go somewhere for the very first time and see something that humans have never seen before. And it was just a remarkable journey, and I feel so privileged to have done that. So that's our robotic stuff. Well, and that's me with a model of New Horizons in my hand. It's not very big. It's only about the size of a grand piano, the whole spacecraft. And this book that I have in my hand, my mother gave me this when I was 7 years old. It's on the planets. And that's where I learned about Pluto and all the planets. So I took it to the mission. We, with our telescopes, are seeing out further, and we're seeing beyond our solar system. So we're now seeing planets going around other stars, and some of them look like they're like the Earth, like this one. They're a little bit more massive than us. They might have water on their surface. They're in the Goldilocks zone of their stars. They're not too far away to be cold. They're not too close to be too hot. They're just right, like we are. Not too hot, not too cold. However, they're not going to be like the Earth. They're not. At least the ones we've been finding so far, because the stars that they go around are red dwarf stars, which are very dim. So in order to get heat from them, you've got to be really close. So these planets are closer to their star than our Mercury is to the sun. And the time it takes them to go around, their year is measured in days or maybe weeks. So they're super, super close. And when you're that close to a star, you become gravitationally locked, like our moon is. We always see the same side of the moon, because the moon, okay, make Jupiter the moon. As the moon goes, the moon actually does rotate, but it takes a month to do that. So it's rotating at the same speed as it's going around us. So that's what it's doing. So we always see the same face. So that's what would happen to these planets. They're always going to have one side facing the star and one side facing the coldness of outer space. So that would mean one side's going to be like the Sahara Desert. The sun would not move in the sky. The sun would always be in the same place. So one side's going to be like the Sahara Desert. The other side's going to be like Antarctica in the wintertime. Maybe there's a band in the middle, but I don't know what kind of weather you're going to get on a planet like that. But it's not like the Earth. Even if it's in the Goldilocks zone, even if it's got water on surface, it's not going to be like here. It's not going to be like here. And I think this is the biggest lesson that we have found, is that we live in this very, very large galaxy. We haven't explored very much of it. The planets that we have found are all within just a couple of thousand light years. Very, very small circle around that dot there. There's so much else that we haven't seen just in our galaxy, and so much left to explore. But we're here, we're stuck. We're stuck on this little tiny planet. So this is it. This is it. And I met the guy who took this picture, by the way. This was the last picture of the full Earth taken by a human being holding a camera. Jack Schmitt, the only scientist to go to the moon, on the very last mission to the moon, Apollo 17, in 1972, on the way home, they happened to have a full Earth. And he's into photography, and he took this shot. And what gets me about this picture, can you see the continent of Africa there? In the middle, underneath that band of clouds here on the east coast, is Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Kenya, where we have found the oldest human remains of our human ancestors, the Australopithecines, going back a couple of million years. And they were the first to develop tools, stone tools. So I find it kind of poetic that the last handheld picture of the entire Earth is looking back at the very spot where handheld tools first emerged. It's very poetic. So this is it. This is it. This is all we have, is this. So it really makes you appreciate what we have with these laws of physics that we have to put up with until we figure out what the Star Wars galaxy figured out. So this is it. At the same time, we need science fiction. Oops, wrong program. Okay. Okay, Star Wars, Star Trek. Wait. How many for Star Wars? Yeah. You're obviously Star Trek? Yeah? Okay. Again, the aliens all speak English and they all look like us. They have head deformities, that's about it. Anyway, we need science fiction. We need science fiction. I read a lot of it. I love it. We need this imagination to tell us what could be and what we haven't done yet and what the possibilities are. We need that kind of imagination to give us the incentive to improve ourselves and make life better. And part of that is looking up at the stars, which we do up here at the center of the universe. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening here tonight, and thank you so much for coming out. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We have a couple of minutes for questions. Does anybody want to ask me? Oh, yes. Would this, at this scale, would it be beyond the planet's Roche limit? What he's asking, there's a limit. If you bring an object too close to a planet, the tidal forces would rip it apart. So the moon can't be any closer than about 10,000 kilometers to us or it'll be torn apart. That's why Saturn has rings. So would the Death Star be torn apart? That's a good question. I don't know the mass of the Death Star, but who knows? Maybe that's what's happening here. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think it's big enough for the tidal forces to work on it. But it's a good question. Yeah, yeah. There's a geek in every room, isn't there? Yeah. Anyway, no, that was good. That was a good question. Thank you. Yes, sir. No, both Voyagers are still working. They're nuclear powered. They're nuclear powered. They have these very creative devices. They're called radioisotope thermoelectric generators, and they're about that big around and about that long. And in the middle of it is a thinner than a pencil piece of plutonium left over from the nuclear age. Plutonium is naturally hot, and the heat from that is surrounded by a thermocouple, which is a device that turns heat directly into electricity with no moving parts. And so it's the lifetime of the plutonium that's keeping them going. And so they're still running. They expect them to run maybe another 10 or 15 years. Voyager 1 was having problems over the last month. It started sending some gobbledygook, but that was its computer program. But it was built in the 70s, for God's sakes. We don't have any computers out of the 70s still running, but on Voyager they still are. And they keep bringing them up updates and trying to, they actually have tape recorders inside them to record the data and play it back. Amazingly, they're still working. So that's why they're still running. But we'll probably lose them. But then after that, their space junk that'll just drift, and they figure they have a lifetime in space of at least 1 billion years, if not more, because there's no corrosion in space. They don't put salt in the roads out there. So they have the potential to possibly cross the galaxy once, and or at least circle it. And that's remarkable. We've never built anything that lasted that long. So that's why they have the messages on the records from Sagan. Okay, well, I'll be around for a while if you want to talk, but thanks again for coming, and enjoy your dome tour. Go see the telescope. Thanks.